5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Hello, space enthusiasts. This week's guest is James Burke, the Vice President of the Moon Society. As you can imagine, we talk all about the moon, especially how we can develop a sustained human presence there. As always, feel free to email us your questions or comments on the episode at spacebusinesspodcast@gmail.com or post them on our Twitter, which is podcast_space. Now, here are a couple of short messages from our sponsors, then please enjoy my conversation with James Burke from the Moon Society.
My name is Raphael Rodkin, and I'm an investor and advisor to space companies. Just as a reminder, this podcast is for informational purposes only, and nothing should be taken as investment advice. This podcast is sponsored by NanoAvionics, a satellite manufacturer and mission integrator. Their technologies enable many space companies worldwide to offer services that improve life right here on Earth, such as providing global connectivity, conducting Earth observation, or contributing to scientific discoveries. Check them out, and also check out my episode with the CEO and co-founder. Sadly, I am not a rocket scientist, but I'm an alumnus of the International Space University. ISU offers a number of educational programs about space worldwide. Check them out at isunet.edu.
Everybody, I'm here today with James Burke, the VP of the Moon Society. James, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
It's an absolute pleasure. You know, we haven't done an episode on the moon yet, and it is really such a good time to do one because there's so many upcoming missions, which I'm sure we're going to talk about in during this podcast. But as I mentioned, you're the VP of the Moon Society. So why don't we start there? What is the Moon Society?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're the world's largest society dedicated to the moon. We're trying to make sure that we can build a commercial ecosystem around this lunar economy, and we want to, settle the moon. We want to build a commercial lunar base. We recently did a moon-based design contest. We got some great high-quality entries in from that. And we're holding a conference on July 9th. So it's about 8 days from now as we record this. And a lot of those contestants will be presenting their designs for lunar bases.
Oh, that's terrific. I'm so happy then that we're recording this right now because this episode could actually go out as early as tomorrow, which means you listeners, you are not too late to sign up for that conference. And I assume that if people go to the Moon Society website, they can probably find the link to the conference there, right?
That's right. moonsociety.org. It's called the Lunar Development Conference. It's July 9th and 10th. And we're really, really excited about it. We've got a lot of great prominent speakers like General Pete Worden, Leonard David, Andrew Aldrin, Greg Autry, many others. So we're really excited about the conference this year.
Certainly some people who know a thing or two about the moon. That sounds fantastic. So why don't we come back to the Moon Society for a moment? So how did this all start? Like, how old is this? Where are you present? Are you affiliated with some other organization? That kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually grew out of an earlier effort in the 1990s called the Artemis Project. Mm-hmm. And this was the first commercial lunar base design. It was a project that was featured in the old analog science fiction magazine in 1995. And there were a series of conferences in the 90s attended by several folks that became the Artemis Society. And I actually found out about it. I was in college in 1996, and there was a show on the Discovery Channel called Future Fantastic, hosted by Gillian Anderson from the X-Files. And she was talking about this group of lunar renegades that wanted to settle the moon and do it commercially without NASA. And so I was very excited about that. I got involved. And then in the year 2000, we transitioned into being the Moon Society. We created a new organization, and I was selected to be the first vice president. I was very young at the time, but I was selected to do that. And it's been a great experience. I rejoined the society as VP in 2018, and we've done a lot of work in the last 4 years. We've published a few books, and we've held the Lunar Development Conference. This will be our second time now. We held it last year as well. Had over 300 attendees. It was a great conference. You asked, are we affiliated with any other groups? We actually are partners with the National Space Society, which is the largest space advocacy organization, one of them, one of the largest in the U.S. And typically in the past, we've sponsored the Moon Track at their International Space Development Conference, and we're going to be doing that again, we hope, next year when it goes back to be an in-person event.
And in terms of your membership, I mean, James, you're obviously sitting in the US, and your predecessor organization was in the US, but do you have chapters in other places around the world?
We have members in other places. We don't really have a lot of chapters. We don't kind of have that model anymore. We are trying to be more of a virtual organization that's global and doing things online. And so we have a Slack discussion group that we use, and there are folks in there from all over the world that participate in our organization.
Okay, terrific. And I'm so impressed. I mean, you decided to do this in 2000, and I'm trying to remember, I was in college around the same time. But in 2000, I mean, right now it's such a, we're very happy to say there's like almost like an obvious time to talk about the moon, right? Again, with all of the upcoming missions. But correct me if I'm wrong, but if I think back to 2000, that probably was one of the low points in terms of being optimistic about the moon, right? Was there anything on the horizon at that point in time?
Well, I think back then there was a little bit of a groundswell happening because there was a mission in the 90s called Clementine that was a U.S. military technology demonstration mission, and it ended up going around the moon. And that was the mission that found water on the south pole of the moon.
Okay.
And so I think that was like the biggest discovery related to lunar science that's happened ever. Because if we have water on the south pole of the moon, what that means is you can go there and you can utilize that water for a variety of things. You can use the water to drink and for the astronauts to use, but you could also use it for oxygen. You can split off the hydrogen and the oxygen and use the oxygen to breathe. You can also make rocket fuel. You can split off the hydrogen and react it with CO2, and you can make methane rocket fuel. So there's a lot of things you can do, and also liquid oxygen is a rocket fuel as well. So there's a lot of things you could do with water. It's one of the most precious resources in the universe, as we know. That's why Earth is such a great planet, because we are a water world, and we're so rare in not only the solar system but known space of being this water world that's perfect. And so the moon otherwise is a pretty dry world. And so if you have water on the moon's only 3 days away with conventional rocket propulsion. That's how long it took for the Apollo missions to get there. So it's a close destination. And so if you have water on the south pole of the moon, that really transforms what you can do, not just on the moon, but across the solar system.
Absolutely. Okay, let's come back to a very interesting thing you mentioned right at the beginning, which is you were talking, I think if I understood correctly, about commercial lunar bases, which is clearly not something we have right now. So we had obviously the Apollo missions, which are sometimes sort of in a semi-derogatory fashion called footprints and flags, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, flags and footprints. That's what people often say, because they basically did that and they came home and they never went back, right?
Yes, it's sort of like you took the picture, like these days you would take the TikTok video and then you would like leave again and done. I guess, the sort of one potential next step up from that would be what we have here on Earth in places like Antarctica, basically like, small scale research base. But then when you say commercial lunar base, it doesn't sound like an Antarctica style research base to me. That sounds like something else.
No, I mean, you essentially want to start inhabiting the moon permanently, right?
Okay.
And because NASA just has not been able to get it together to do that in the last, 47 or 8 years since the Apollo 17 mission in 1972, we aim to have commercial interest, private interest do it. And, back when we started talking about this in the 1990s, it was a crazy idea. But now it's not so crazy because you have SpaceX and Blue Origin and other private companies doing very well with building rockets and building space hardware. And so now it's really a serious thing that we need to start preparing for.
Okay, and so it's not an Antarctica style, and hence it's also not, because now we have obviously in the Artemis missions, if I remember correctly, there was at least originally the plan to have a permanent base of some sort by the end of this decade, and then Russia and China are talking about the base. But I think both the Artemis as well as the Russian Chinese base, they still would be more like the Antarctica type bases, right?
Yeah, I mean the current envisioning of governmental space programs, you have the Artemis project happening that with NASA, and their goal is 2024, but nobody believes that that's actually going to happen at this point. That was the goal under the previous president, who I won't name. But 2024 is coming up. We are working on hardware for that. We have the Space Launch System rocket, which is a very expensive rocket that hasn't flown yet, but is still in the works and is actually projected to fly later this year if all goes well.
It's vertically integrated right now at Kennedy Space Center, I think, right?
It is. They are building it in the vertical assembly building right now. And the mission, I believe, is scheduled for November. Now, it's been delayed more times than I can count in the past several years, but that is the current goal. And it is an unmanned mission, but it is going to be the precursor of manned missions, piloted missions that send astronauts to the moon in the next few years. So I don't know if they're going to hit 2024, but they are going to hit this decade for sure.
So that one that's supposed to fly in November, correct me if I'm wrong, this Artemis 1, excuse me, I think it's an uncrewed circumlunar flight, right?
That's correct. It's just going to go around the moon. It's going to test out the SLS, the Orion space capsule, which is a larger version of the Apollo design, and it will fly around the moon. And then hopefully it'll be successful, that mission, and then it'll be followed up in a couple years with an astronaut piloted mission.
To first go around the moon again, right? I think that's Artemis 3 from memory. And then I think Artemis 4, you would actually land with a man and a woman.
So the Artemis 2 mission is a circumlunar mission, kind of like the Apollo 8 mission was. They may or may not dock with the Lunar Orbital Gateway, which we can also talk about.
Sure.
But that's not going to land. It's the Artemis 3 that would be the first landing on the moon.
Oh, okay. I always get confused with the numbering. Okay, but as you said, the plan was by 2024, and we see what happens. Once upon a time, there was a plan for SpaceX to fly Yusaku Maezawa on the Starship. I think before 2024. Do you think that might happen?
So SpaceX is really going quickly. I do think that may happen. They have a plan to use the Starship that they're building in Boca Chica, Texas, to fly that same type of circumlunar mission with this Japanese billionaire who's also going to bring along some artists and regular people, which I think is great. And that does look like it's going to happen in the next few years before 2024 at the current pace of things.
Yeah, that would be amazing. I mean, if they're really getting an orbital flight together this year, I mean, it's been amazing progress. Okay, but we'll come back to talk about our transport capability, because that's obviously that's the basis for everything, right? What we want to do on the moon. But let's let's continue on the commercial lunar base. Okay, so very clearly it's not Antarctica style, it's not Artemis or Russia, China style. It is sort of I guess something where people would be happy to stay, like normal people. Is that what you're envisioning?
Yeah, we did a moon-based design contest. And one of the things we wanted to have on the designs was the capability for regular people to come visit as tourists. The winners of the contest, we had a first place and second place, third place winner, but we had over a dozen high quality contestants that submitted designs for a lunar base. They all came up with designs where you could build it pretty easily using, either materials you ship from Earth or in some cases local materials. And you would have a facility that could accommodate a dozen, maybe even up to 30 in some cases, people for either short duration stays or long duration stays.
So that competition, where was that, say, on the spectrum of, you on the one hand, you could run basically let's call it a pure architectural competition, right? Like let's design something that looks nice, versus on the other end of the spectrum, you could, and I guess arguably you should, make all sorts of requirements, like realistic requirements, right? Sort of like that the life support works and all of that. So were those proposals which had to, basically meet certain criteria that they would be realistic?
Absolutely. That was the whole goal, the design should be as realistic as possible, ready to create, manufacture and launch and make operational with existing technology, existing launchers like the Falcon Heavy and this SLS and some of the other ones coming up, like the Ariane 6. The crew of the base would, like I mentioned, would be less than 30 with an ideal size of 10 to 20. And we judge them based on several criteria. We judge them based on engineering criteria, so sort of the robustness and innovation of the systems and technologies. On economic criteria, is this design financially feasible? The architectural style, sort of the innovation and the physical design, and is it going to be a beautiful place to visit and to see from orbit? And also, we asked them to think about how would you manage a society like that, a base like that? What's the culture of that base? How do the inhabitants live? And why would a tourist want to visit? And then also their management and politics. How do they have relations with Earth? And how is the settlement governed? Those were all factors in how we judge the submissions.
So let's leave the political side and the governments to one side. We'll come back. That's clearly hugely interesting. But in terms of some of the technical stuff, probably they were using some of the in situ available materials, I'm hoping. But in terms of building a site like a base like this, how much tonnage would we have to bring from Earth, roughly speaking?
Oh, that's a good question. They varied. Let's see. I think our winning design, that was around, I want to say like 20 tons. Let me see if I could pull it up here.
Okay. So that's actually, I mean, especially with like, let's say Starship works and it can be refueled in Earth orbit, that's totally feasible.
Yeah, no, we wanted it to be a realistic design that could be launched in the near term, that wasn't super, that wasn't using futuristic technologies or anti-gravity or, stuff we couldn't do with present day technology, like take moon dirt and make
Star Trek replicators and
take moon dirt and make like perfect symmetrical glass out of it, with a 3D printer, something like that. It needed to be realistic. So that was all part of the criteria.
Well, then in fairness, some people are working on what you just mentioned, sort of taking regolith and like printing that into various things.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I went to visit a team at Caltech a couple years ago, and they were literally taking lunar regolith simulant, and they had built a large extruder. It was in a garage in one of the houses at Caltech, and they were 3D printing bricks, and the bricks kind of fit together like Legos.
Yeah.
And the whole idea was that they would, launch this apparatus to the moon someday and build the base, print out the base.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. And was there an element in the contest as well where people had to think about sort of the financial angle, like how much this might cost and how to finance that?
Yeah, we did have that as a criteria. And for the most part, the money was raised through private investment, in some cases through government grants in addition to private investment, but it was never just a 100% only government funding. We wanted this to be a private base or a public-private base. And there was some thought as well, once the base is up and running, of how to generate revenue. That was part of the economic scoring, was how would you actually generate revenue? And some of the designs had ideas for mining water or creating local, creating products out of local materials to help finance the operation of the base. In some cases, that would mean, selling fuel to other space projects that are, going to go elsewhere in the solar system.
Well, this was going to be one of my main questions, I guess, about a commercial lunar base, right? Because footprints and flags, that's easy. Even like the Antarctica-style research station, that's easy because, you justify being there basically by exactly by that virtue of doing some research. But as soon as you talk about wanting to have a sustained presence, right, especially by, in the end, quote unquote, normal people, those normal people need a reason to come and then ideally a reason to stay, right? Mm-hmm. So in your view, what could be some of those reasons? I guess you mentioned natural resources and resource extraction could be one.
Yeah, that could be one. I think the biggest one is going to be space tourism. I think if you can go to the moon on vacation, right, it'd be a great 1 week trip. It's 3 days out. You spend a day or two on the moon. You get to go into low gravity there. You spend a couple nights and then you come back. You could do it all in a week or, in around a week. And I think a lot of people would be interested in that. And if you could get the cost of that down to, something affordable for someone in the middle class, then you're going to have a lot of demand for that. There's going to be tourist settlements sprouting up on the moon, if that's the case.
Yeah. And I guess at the end of the day, it's funny, right? It's not actually different at all from when back in the olden days here on Earth, we, for the first times went out to very remote places, right? It was evil to find but I guess it was mostly to find raw materials, right? When people like first went out to California for the gold rush or to Alaska. Then I guess we also went to some faraway places for tourism. And then I guess you have some other examples like Australia being a penal colony, which is funny because now that reminds me of, I think it was one of the Man in Black movies where they have a maximum security prison on the moon, which is probably not what we want. but anyway.
Well, people settled the Earth, came to the New World and settled different places for a variety of reasons. I mean, in some cases, they came for economic reasons, like you mentioned, the gold rush. For other reasons, for other times they came for religious reasons or political reasons. Going to a place that's brand new that you can start fresh is appealing to a lot of people. You can leave behind maybe the life that you're not enjoying as much and start a new one. I think that itself has a huge appeal, and that's going to drive a lot of space colonization in the future, I believe.
Yeah. And I guess now that I think about it, there's some other, potential, I guess, call it industries or businesses as well. I mean, if we hopefully continue with the, exploration of the universe, and it's also going to be like a natural staging area, right? And the testing area and all of that.
Yeah. The moon's an ideal place to, for example, if you're going to send humans to Mars, you can test all your hardware on the moon. It's 3 days away. If there's a problem, it's easy to come back. It's easy to deal with things. It's easy to send supplies, and it's going to be a great place to kind of pilot out long-term human exploration. There are more attractive places in the solar system in terms of raw materials and science and things like that. But the moon is easy. The moon is going to be the first place we go in mass because it's so close and because it has so many reasons to go.
Right. Now, of course, we were comparing it just now a lot to sort of people exploring the Earth. Of course, one key difference is this is more hostile than any place on Earth, right? I mean, if you were in the olden days, you were like, I don't know, like Amish, and you were plowing your field in Europe, and you felt discriminated. Okay, you left for America, and you were plowing your field there, and it was basically the same climate, more or less. It's obviously not the case on the moon. So that brings us to, I guess, for all of this to happen, there is a huge infrastructure investment, right? So let's just go through those things right now just to see where we stand, how you think we can get this put into place, and how we can get this financed and all of that. I guess it all starts with what we always said, the transport capability, right? And obviously we had so in the 60s, we had Apollo, and the Soviets almost made it. And now we have the Space Launch System and Starship. So how do you feel about the transport capability? Do you think that part of that piece of the puzzle is pretty much solved?
It's getting there. I wouldn't say it's solved yet. I mean, we also have Falcon Heavy, and that's flying, but it's pretty expensive. Starship will be really the game changer because it's a reusable rocket, and it's you can refly it. It's very low cost. It's using methane fuel for the upper stage, so you can generate the fuel elsewhere than on Earth and refuel it. So that's really the game changer. But that's the huge enabling technology is transportation, and making sure that once that's in place, there's going to be a whole bunch of other industries, companies that are formed to utilize that transportation.
Okay, and I guess we also, I was asking specifically, I guess implicitly, about crewed transportation, but then as evidenced by all of these upcoming missions the next few years, there's also a garden variety of uncrewed probes, which will go to the cislunar transport, basically for non-crewed cislunar transport.
Right. Yeah, there's quite a few missions coming up, not just in the U.S., but other countries are flying missions to the moon. China landed several rovers in the last few years.
Yep.
Landed a rover on the far side, a lander on the far side, landed a rover recently and did a sample return mission, which was a huge deal. And they're going to follow that up with another sample return mission, Chang'e 6. India had a setback where their lander crashed, but they're going to follow that up with another attempt.
Sure.
And then of course, Israel with the Space IL private mission. It was a failure, but it demonstrated that they can do a space mission extremely cost effectively.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And they'll likely be trying again. Unfortunately, they won't be able to go pick up all the tardigrades they deposited on the moon, which a lot of people were very upset about and remain very upset about. But that demonstrated low-cost lunar missions. And then here in the U.S., you have just a variety of things happening. There's a program to land payloads on the moon, the CLIPS program.
Yeah.
And that is well underway. You have several, the big winner there was SpaceX, but you had several other companies competing with new hardware designs to land payload on the moon. You have the Viper mission that JPL is working on to investigate the South Pole and the volatiles and the water ice there, to really map that out and look at the feasibility of mining that. So there's a lot going on. It's great. There's more going on around the moon now than there has been for a very long time.
Which one of those many missions, if any, are you most excited about?
Well, I'm obviously excited about the Artemis program the most and getting humans back to the moon. But I think the Viper mission sounds very interesting. You know, JPL does a fantastic job with all their planetary science missions, and getting more information about the volatiles on the South Pole of the moon, I think, is a high priority thing for everyone. If we have more information about that, that can really be the business justification, so to speak, to fund more missions to the moon.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. So like, as you probably know, my main job besides doing this is actually being a venture investor in space. And probably as most VC investors in space, we, unfortunately for the moment, we're still having a little bit of trouble getting our head around anybody with a lunar business model, because while there's people who have received, quite significant contracts, like Astrobotics springs to mind. I think they have a couple of contracts, but just one of them I think is $200 million. Those are substantially government contracts. And the question then always is, well, once that contract is over, what's next? How do you make this a sustainable commercial business? Are there any signs? Is there anything you have seen, maybe private customers of some of these missions, that gives us reason for optimism that there are some emerging use cases?
I think, again, it goes back to getting Starship flying. I think once you have a reusable rocket that's low cost, that can go to the moon and other destinations, there's so many different applications for that type of transportation. And you're going to have so many different ideas of new missions, of other ways to utilize that capability that haven't been dreamed up yet. And that's really going to explode the economy, the cislunar economy. I fully believe in the next 10 years, you're going to have a lot of new companies get started that are doing things in the region between the Earth and the moon. You're going to have satellites going out to the L1, to the Lagrange points, L1, L5. You're going to have orbiters around the moon. NASA's going to build the Lunar Gateway, which is a small space station that's going to be around the moon, kind of like a reusable command module from the Apollo days. It can go any place around the moon because it's in a polar orbit, or it's in a elliptical orbit that can be changed. So there's quite a few applications once the transportation is there, and there'll be a lot of demand, I believe, for venture capital to fund these viable businesses that are made possible by the transportation system.
Yeah, how can we incentivize and catalyze this, what you call the dreaming up of such business models? Because I'll be honest with you, at the moment, among the many, many, many business plans that cross my desk, my partner's desk, we don't really see any of that yet.
Don't see any of what exactly?
Like commercial lunar business plans, which are not just cislunar transport. Like cislunar transport, obviously, you have quite a few companies now.
Right. Well, the lunar surface, that is something where you need to have a good utilization story for that.
Yeah.
We've talked in this podcast about space tourism. That'd be one. Possibly leveraging some of the natural resources that are there. Obviously, helium-3 is something people always talk about, but it's still a little bit in the future to actually have a market for that. We're powering fusion reactors with that. That's not here yet, but I think it eventually will be. But so I look at it as utilizing the water on the moon, because if you can mine the water and get it cheaply off of the lunar surface into orbit around the moon or orbit around the Earth, that would be an extremely valuable resource. Where you could use that to refuel rockets going to Mars or other destinations, and use it for astronauts and human exploration and all those destinations as well. So I think that's if we can really solve how to do that easily, and again, it again comes back to the transport system. Getting things from point A to point B cheaply is really the enabling technology here.
Okay, so let's continue. So I agree. The transport capability is sort of the most fundamental building block, and fingers crossed, Starship works. That is, like you said, it's going to make a really, really big difference. Now, before you then can put into place other businesses, let's say resource extraction, like water extraction on the moon, you need a bunch of other things as well, though. And correct me if you don't agree, but you basically need some some basic infrastructure, right? So
Yes.
Energy comes to mind. Whatever you do, you will need energy. Then you may need some, a good remote sensing of the moon, maybe some navigation capability, communications capability. If there are humans involved, then life support systems. How do you see will these infrastructure components, how will they be put into place? Will that be dependent on government or maybe even international consortium of governments, or how do you envision this will happen?
I think there will be government funding for all that infrastructure, in the context of sending more astronauts to the moon once the first few missions are starting in a few years. There will be a huge demand for more astronauts to be sent to the moon, and in each country we'll get into a new sort of space race where these different large countries like the US, China, and Russia and Europe are trying to one up each other and build lunar bases. I think in that world you're going to have a lot of commercial development to support that. So you're going to have, like you mentioned, the logistics and the infrastructure, communications, satellites, remote sensing, all those things I think will end up being done by private interests as they are now in Earth orbit. And so I think some of that will be government funding, and some of that will be businesses starting because they know they can find paying customers for their services, just like any other business on Earth.
Right. And how do you see, to the extent it involves governments, how do you see it evolving between the US and some of the other countries? I guess what we're seeing now is two big groups, right? I guess there's the US and anybody who signed the Artemis Accords, and it'd be actually interesting to hear your view on the Artemis Accords as well. And then sort of potentially like a Russia-China bloc and nations that may align with Russia and China.
That is what it is right now. Those are sort of the two blocks. You described them accurately. I don't think that that's going to stand long term. I do believe space should be an international effort. And we already are partnering with the Russians on the International Space Station. I believe the political winds are going to start blowing different directions in the future, and there will be more cooperation between us and China and Russia. But obviously some things down here on Earth need to get solved first. If you project the current direction out, then yes, there are two camps. You have sort of the West and everyone that signed the Artemis Accords, which I think they're definitely needed. Most of space is governed by the Outer Space Treaty, which was signed in the 60s. Even before we even launched the Apollo missions, it was signed. And that's the legal regime that stands right now in space, that no government can claim space. And there's really not much to say in that about private property rights, things like that. So the Artemis Accords are trying to make an effort to address some of that, developing safety zones around future human bases. You're not necessarily claiming them, but you're saying that this is going to be under the auspices of the country that operates it, and you need permission to enter it and things like that. That's definitely needed. I don't know if that's the perfect treaty, but it's definitely, I'm definitely a supporter of it. But China and Russia are doing their own thing, right? They're doing their own partnership, and whether or not they respect the Artemis Accords remains to be seen.
Yeah, and I guess there's law. Law is one thing, right? And another thing is enforcing the law, and that's not special to the moon. That's true on Earth as well, right? How do you see the enforcement happening? And maybe there were some ideas out of the contest you said when people had to think about governance as well.
I think it is definitely hard to enforce laws in space unless you're there, unless you're going to send the Space Force out to enforce the laws, which I think is a little far-fetched, right? So I think that you're going to have sanctions basically back on Earth for people that violate those treaties, some penalty that they try to institute back on Earth, and it's not going to have, it may not have a lot of teeth, right? There may be widespread violations of the Artemis Accords by China and Russia. We don't know. I think if you go back to, we're all going to space to explore and to build our shared future as humanity. If you have that mindset, I know it's hard because not everyone is going to have that mindset, but if you reinforce that, I think that's the way to go.
Yeah, I agree with you. But then realistically speaking, if we go further out in moon, then obviously cislunar space and the moon itself are a strategic location, again, because they are a staging area also for further places. And secondly, even if we talk about the resources, and correct me if I'm remembering something incorrectly now, but you're talking about the water ice, right? And so even though the moon it's obviously not as big as the Earth, but it's still a relatively big place. If you actually look at where resources are concentrated, you're actually talking about a relatively small area.
You are, but there are several different areas. Like there's not just one crater. Like obviously Shackleton crater is the one that most people talk about, but there's more than that, and then just that site that has water ice. I mean, another way to look at this is space is pig. You know, I think there's enough resources out there for everyone in the long term. And you know, I think, for example, let's kind of play out a scenario. Say the U.S. builds a base near Shackleton and starts mining water, right? And they have a good operation going, and they're mining water. And then China sets up right next door, like right next door to their base. China lands a base or a mission, and they start mining the same exact water, right? Well, there's going to be that's going to be a dispute where back on Earth, there's going to be a lot of finger pointing and hair pulling about it, and they'll come up with some diplomatic solution, right? I don't think like literally the astronauts will start shooting each other, because first of all, it would be very easy to win a battle in space, right? It's very easy to like one bullet would basically take someone out, because as soon as their spacesuit leaks, they're going to have a challenge there. So I don't really believe there's going to be shooting wars in space in the near future, because it's just not very practical, and it's just so destructive, and everything that you launch to space is so expensive. I think they're going to try to find a way to resolve those differences on the ground.
Yeah, I can't help remembering now. I'm sure you watched it as well, right? The Space Force, the satire.
Yeah, I enjoyed that one. There's also a really good one on Apple TV called For All Mankind. I highly recommend everyone check that out as well. And they get into some of this.
Yeah, you should definitely, our listeners, watch both series. But the reason I remembered Netflix Space Force now is because, of course, that's exactly what happened. You had a Chinese and an American base in close proximity, and then they kind of end up trashing each other's base while the others are not there.
Right. Yeah, and it's very funny, but I don't think that's very realistic.
Yeah, that's definitely not where we want to go. Yeah. I think the other interesting sort of now we're getting to sci-fi references, which is great, because that's where we always finish up as well. The other recent sci-fi reference that springs to mind was, I know you watched the movie Ad Astra.
Yes.
And that obviously also starts, on the moon, right, again, as a staging area for Mars. And there it's quite clear, I think, from what they're depicting in the movie, that there's basically a Wild West situation going on.
Yeah, I wasn't a huge fan of the scene with the rovers on Ad Astra where they're kind of doing a car chase on the moon. I also didn't think that was very realistic. You had sort of lunar piracy going on too. I think if you had lunar pirates, it would be pretty easy to just get some air cover and take them out in space. So no, I didn't really like that part of that movie. I did like seeing the huge base they had, which was basically like a shopping mall on the moon. That was cool. Although they never really depicted the low gravity environment. If you want to talk about really good sci-fi recently, I would look at The Expanse.
Yes.
Because they do try to depict things realistically, and they have sort of scenes of people on the moon where they're pouring a drink and the liquid flows slowly as it would on the moon. And the low gravity environment as well. So, those are all factors that we're going to have to adjust to when we go to the moon and live there for long periods of time.
No, this is exactly. I was going to ask you, what is your favorite sci-fi depiction of the moon? And I am with you. I really like The Expanse. It's interesting. They call the moon, I guess, in The Expanse is called Lunar, as it is here on Earth in some languages. Which other sci-fi depictions of the moon do you like?
I really like that. I don't know. There really haven't been a lot of good ones, unfortunately. I usually watch all the space-related movies that come out. I'm a huge fan of Star Wars and Star Trek, but the older I get, the more I know about space science. I just feel like some of those are a real missed opportunity to tell the story of what it's really going to be like. I do like For All Mankind. I think that was really well done. And certainly The Expanse would be number one on my list.
It's a little bit older. What did you think of the moon depiction in 2001: A Space Odyssey?
I did like that. I liked their Clavis base. I watched that from time to time. That movie, 2001. I think 2010 got a little bit more far out, and it was more like an 80s movie than a sci-fi movie. But no, I really think the depiction of the Clavis base, it was a very large base. There were hundreds of people there, but you saw the scene where they found the monolith, where they have the dig site.
Yeah.
That was like, other than the fact that it was science fiction, that seemed scientifically realistic, where they had, all the folks in spacesuits and were worried about some of those factors. So,
and I guess we've been talking about TV series and movies so far. How about some of the books? And of course, the key one that springs to mind, at least for me, would be Heinlein, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress.
Those are the classics. Heinlein was great. I read a lot of that in grade school and high school. Very kind of far out now. Not really. It's very dated now. There was one recently I read that was written about 15 years ago. It was kind of depicting the vision for space exploration under the George W. Bush administration. Their plan to go back to the moon, which used the Orion capsule, but had, the Ares rocket and an Antares lander that hadn't really ever been built.
Mm-hmm.
So I like that. That was kind of a good story. I wish they would have made that into a movie. So yeah, I think there's an opportunity for more people to write science fiction centered on the moon. I don't think there's been a lot of great work on that. Obviously, people write a lot of stories about Mars and the outer planets and things like that, and the far future. But the moon is within our lifetime for sure. And I think having more realistic depictions of it would help speed things up.
Yes, agreed. And so Heinlein also, for obvious reasons, Moon is a Harsh Mistress reminds me of again sort of the political and the governance angle, which you said was a key part of the lunar base competition you ran. Were there any sort of interesting ideas of like how to run a base from that competition?
How to operate the base.
Yeah, from a governance point of view, governance/political point of view.
Yeah, I think when you get into operating a base, because the moon is so close to Earth, there's going to be a huge tie-in between the Earth and entities on the Earth and whoever's on the moon. You don't have that same separation you're going to have with a crew on Mars, where there's a 20-minute communication delay and it takes 6 to 9 months to get there. That's going to be completely different. So on the moon, you're definitely going to have sort of mission control back on Earth in your ear a lot, or your boss back on Earth in your ear a lot, telling you what to do. And then, if you don't do your job well, they're going to just send you back to Earth because it's only 3 days away. So I think there's definitely going to be still a huge tie-in with Earth. But yeah, when you talk about governing small space settlements, there's going to be a lot of new concepts, I think, that are tried out. If you have a settlement that is a tourist settlement where you have a lot of people staying short term, there'll be some sort of ground rules of how to behave there, some rules that you can't violate, or you'll get kind of locked, sent back to Earth early, or maybe there'll be a little brig that you have to sit in if you're really bad, right? Before they send you back. But so there'll be rules that people will have to follow, and there'll probably be more sort of a military style hierarchy structure of whatever settlement there is, where there's one person in charge, the captain, so to speak, because it is still a very dangerous environment. You have people's lives in your hands when you're operating a settlement like that. And so there are certainly a need for a chain of command and people to follow orders directly in an emergency. So I think there'll still be, in the near term, some element of that. But you'll see people a group that goes out to the moon and sort of self-organizes when they get there. And maybe the hierarchy changes based on voting. You have sort of direct elections of who's in charge. I think you'll see stuff like that as well in the near future.
Okay. And I guess at some point in time, like you said, you mentioned the brig and everything, and if people misbehave, that would imply you need some sort of even if it's a part-time, but some sort of a security force, right?
Yeah, you will need, if you have a tourist settlement, you will need some type of policing of it. It could be done by everyone. It could be a shared responsibility, or you could have people designated in that role. Maybe they're dual-hatted as a policeman, but also like an engineer or maintenance person. Yeah. But I definitely think that'll be the case, because that's just human nature. Whenever you have large groups of people that are strangers to each other, you have to have some level of rules and policing of behavior.
Yeah. And the other thing, of course, the other sort of public servant type role, not public servant, but I don't know what to call that, but yeah, a similar role that we need in a society here on Earth is the medical profession. How do you envision, will that work? Will there be like local medical attention? Will there be some, I don't know, maybe, or will people be brought back to Earth for severe cases, or how would that
I definitely think you'll have a doctor or someone with medical training in every settlement. and they'll have a medical facility for things like, that can do things like simple injuries and broken limbs and, minor surgeries if needed. If someone's having a life-threatening situation, you can't really take 3 days to send them back to Earth to go to a hospital. You need to deal with it there. So there'll be ways to do that.
Yeah. And by the way, I mean, again, I could make sort of the terrestrial comparison. I mean, there is a lot of places on Earth which are remote enough that you actually need several days to come back. For example, I went trekking the Himalayas, and if you're in some side valley in the Everest region, you will need 3 days to at least a decent hospital. Or if you're in Antarctica during the winter, I guess you're possibly stuck for quite a long time.
That's true. I've talked to folks that have gone to Antarctica. One gentleman I talked to lived at the Concordia station in Antarctica, which is like way in the middle of nowhere. There's like 1,000 miles between it and the nearest settlement in Antarctica, and he was there for like 6 or 8 months. And he was the medical doctor that was there. He was responsible for 8 crew members during his time. And yeah, if something really bad happened, there's not a lot of options you have. You got to kind of order an airlift, take the person out, and that might take a day or two.
Yeah, there's actually when you notice there's a fascinating story from the 60s from a Russian Antarctica base where basically the only person with medical training, he got appendicitis himself. So he self-operated.
Yep, absolutely. Just like Matt Damon in The Martian. I mean, there's stories like that in real life for sure.
Good. Look, as we're winding up here, James, is there any other aspect sort of lunar settlement, the establishment of a commercial lunar base that we didn't touch upon that you think are worth mentioning?
One of the things I'm really interested in right now is cryptocurrency and how that might play into future lunar economies. There's a project I'm helping out right now called Mooncoin that's been around for a long time, since 2013. And it's a smaller cryptocurrency. It's not well known. It's similar to Bitcoin and Litecoin. It is a currency that has its own blockchain. And I think that's using a technology like that, I think there's a lot of applications to lunar exploration you can make. For example, if you are mining water on the moon and you need a way to track how those resources are transported, even sold, using a blockchain might be a good solution for that. And that's one of the things that we hope to pilot out with Mooncoin, is how to do things like that.
Okay, interesting. Just a clear reminder of the caveat to all the listeners here, nothing on this podcast is investment advice. So
yes, no, it's not investment advice. And I'm not an investment advisor.
Okay. James, so if people are excited about the moon, what is your sort of call to arms? How can they get involved? Besides, obviously, attending, maybe joining the Moon Society and attending the conference in a few days.
Yeah, no, that would be the big thing. I mean, they can join the Moon Society. It's only $35 a year, and if you join, you can go to the conference for free. We may also have other events coming up that you can attend for free. The conference itself is only $10, so it's affordable for everyone, and it's July 9th and 10th. We'll have a great lineup of speakers. I mentioned a few of them already. Leonard David is a space journalist. I can't wait to hear what he has to say about lunar settlement. Obviously, General Worden, who was behind the Clementine mission I mentioned earlier, but also many other space projects, such as the Kepler mission, was also the director of NASA Ames and currently heads up the Breakthrough Propulsion Initiative that's trying to send an interstellar mission. He'll be our keynote speaker. So it'll be a great event. But yeah, we need all kinds of folks to join the Moon Society, help us out with our projects. We could use people of all skill levels to help settle the moon. I mean, that's ultimately our goal, is settling the moon, building a commercial lunar base in the next 10 years. And we've been at it for a long time, as I mentioned. So you can come join us and help out.
And I really echo that. And it's a really exciting time for the moon. So yes, please, people, do check out the conference. And James, it's been a pleasure to have you on. Maybe we'll do this again, sometime in the future when we have one of those missions touching down on the moon, or maybe after Artemis 1 or so. But it was a pleasure to have you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. I had a great time.
Well, that's it for another nominal episode of the Space Business Podcast. If you like this podcast, please consider giving it a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform, such as iTunes. You can follow us on Twitter at podcast_space. Also consider supporting us at www.patreon.com/spacebusinesspodcast. If the podcast got you interested in learning more about the business opportunities in the space economy, check out my new online course on space entrepreneurship on udemy.com. The link is in the episode description.
Lastly, if you have any feedback, including ideas for guests, and that may include yourself if you have an exciting space story to tell, or interested in being a sponsor, drop us an email at spacebusinesspodcast@gmail.com. I look forward to seeing you for the next episode.